In archaeology in recent years, there have been more of a push to adopt open data standards and practices towards the goal of greater accessibility and reproducibility. As a result, multiple open access archaeological databases have been established, including the Digital Index of North American Archaeology. And what that is a clearinghouse for archaeological data that uses linked open data to link together information from multiple state databases together into a singular hub. It is through this linking that subprojects such as the DINAA LSL, or linking sites and literature, are possible. And what exactly the linking sites and literature project is, I will go into detail a little later in this talk. Another relatively new paradigm within archaeological research is community-based archaeology. And what community-based archaeology involves is working with communities, especially indigenous communities, in order to not only include multiple perspectives from within research, but also to work with communities in making a case for the public, to the public, of the cultural and social value of archaeology. So what does this have to do with open data? Well, community-based archaeology can and should adopt open data practices in the management of their own data, and also open data portals such as Open Context can store articles and reports from community-based projects in order to express a more holistic form of archaeology in a digital context. So what I'm going to discuss here today is the LSL as a potential avenue for exploring indigenous cultural identity and heritage. And how I'm going to do that is I will first provide a background on both the DINAA LSL and community-based archaeology, discuss the analysis that's been done in order to explore key terms within the LSL, the categories, and their spatial locations. And finally, I will offer some suggestions about improvements and avenues of future research informed by some of these principles of community-based archaeology. So first I'm going to go into what exactly the Linking Sites and Literature project is. The LSL project is an effort to link archaeological site numbers with its relevant literature. Its initial work focused on the manual text binding of Smithsonian Trinomial site identifiers within the then newest non-embargoed decade of American Antiquity through JSTOR. Now, back in summer of 2016, when we started this project, this would have been from 2003 to 2013. And I also have a quick note about Smithsonian Trinomials, which are the way that archaeological site numbers are expressed within the United States. They're expressed in an SSCCNN format, and the first part of that represents a 1 to 2 digit number from 1 to 50 representing a state. The second part of that represents a character string of length 2 associated with the name of most often a county or sometimes a national park or other political region within a particular state. And the last part of that represents a number indicating the ordinal recognition of a particular archaeological site. So, for example, if there was, a site that was 12 SJ 576 would represent the 576th site found in St. Joseph County in Indiana. So what we did with these trinomials that were found within JSTOR is we visually identified them using a Google form and took note of where in the literature they were located. So, for example, if they were found where they were in relation to the word site, if they weren't within 100 characters of the word site, where was the site number within that 100 character buffer around the trinomial, and where was it in the text? So whether it was in a table versus where it was in, if it were in the body, or even in an image which is an example of a place where it may not be able to be parsed using optical character recognition software. And the results of this analysis was basically a data set with trinomials and their location context. And what we did with this data was we cleaned and did some summary statistical analysis on the data. And this set of data served as the first batch of data that was put into the LSL. And this is it's a screenshot of what it actually looks like in the Open Context website. So if you have a trinomial and you have basically the literature that it is linked to. And later on in late 2017, we added trinomials and literature that are associated with the Index of Texas Archaeology into the DINAA LSL. So to now provide some information on community-based archaeology, it can be broadly defined as efforts to include communities, and especially indigenous communities, in the archaeological research that happens in their area. So it's a new paradigm that seeks to forge relationships between communities and researchers, and ensuring that archaeological research has benefits for the communities that it is conducted in. And just to quickly go over some of the factors that help to create community-based archaeology, one huge factor was Native American activism, which made known to archaeologists that indigenous groups wanted their beliefs and their systems to be acknowledged rather than marginalized and ignored. The passage of NAGPRA, the Native American Graves and Protection and Repatriation Act, which provided a legal reason for archaeologists to work more closely with indigenous groups, and also influences from inside academia, which include more emphasis on ethics, public education, and outreach. And there's also a public archaeology component within community-based archaeology, which is tied through the commonality of being connected to archaeological ethics. And one key point I want to stress here is an important part of public archaeology is the accessibility of the materials, not only in terms of physical and digital access, but through accessible language and terms. So to talk about the methods of this particular project, to conduct an analysis of location and identity-related keywords aimed towards the use of the LSL as a way to investigate cultural heritage, the first step was to explore the keywords from within the data. So first step was to basically take the LSL data and take it from Open Context and run it through an R script that was written to parse each word within the column containing the names of the articles that were mentioned in a particular entry in the LSL. And what was done with that data set was to create a frequency table of these words and to basically use human filtering, which basically means going through and removing all of the irrelevant or very common words such as and or. And what we had left was basically a list of identity and location-based words. And each of these words were analyzed in the context of the articles that they appeared in through searches on Open Context and through JSTOR. And this is what the word frequency tables looked like. And what was done through this was these contexts were expressed through a Boolean attribute that was added onto this original data set, and the calculations of percentages were then generated through that. And finally, the data was analyzed spatially through associating each of the terms with locations they were found in. So the results showed that out of the 87 words that were chosen for analysis with this particular method, 73% were location names, 7% were the names of indigenous peoples, 27% were anthropological or archaeological terms, and 3.5% were the names of non-indigenous peoples. And an important note is that these add up to more than 100% because these categories were basically non-binary. And for all of these words that are identified, we had 178 unique locations, which, as this first map shows, this is a map of all the location-based words. And most of these are clustered in Texas, and that was due to a huge Texas influence from the Index of Texas Archaeology literature. Moving on to anthropological and archaeological terms, these were mostly associated with, these are more scattered. You see there's a couple of clusters in the upper Midwest, and especially, again, around Texas, but that's because of how the data skewed. And with indigenous related words, these are basically came out to be in two clusters, one in a tri-state area between Texas, Oklahoma, and Arkansas, and another one being in the upper Midwest in Wisconsin and Minnesota. And this is the last one is words referring to non-indigenous peoples, which is basically trivial. There were only very few words that referred to this, and most of them were found in Texas. So, and this is where I offer my mea culpa here. The results reveal that the current functionality of the DINAA LSL as a starting point to investigate indigenous cultures is somewhat limited due to the fact that the majority of terms are either locations or terms that are used by archaeologists. And how to address these shortcomings can increase online accessibility of gray literature, which details community archaeology projects, and also encourage archaeologists to use more of these culturally meaningful terms in the literature itself. So, and what I mean by the gray literature part is, according to Sonia Adelaide in her book, Community-Based Archaeology, there are many reports of collaboration between researchers and tribal members that simply are not published in an academic context. And inclusion of these reports from community-based archaeology into the DINAA LSL may reduce this issue through literature that incorporates multiple forms of knowledge, which are informed by indigenous sensibilities. And another way is through, again, encouraging archaeologists to use more culturally meaningful terms when writing these articles in the first place, through including terms that are relevant to indigenous tribes, which can be accomplished through collaboration or consultation with indigenous communities. And through this, the task of exploring cultural identity through archaeological literature becomes more trivial. And it's also, again, returning to that point about public archaeology, this becomes more trivial. And it is also and through this inclusion of more culturally relevant terms, the LSL will become a more useful tool for identity exploration. So to conclude, these results show the shortcomings of using the DINAA LSL as a way to explore indigenous cultural heritage. This issue requires an examination of the articles and reports that are being linked to the LSL, but also an examination of the rhetorics and word choices that archaeologists use when writing these reports in the first place. So future avenues of research should also explore that a little bit more. Thank you.